Network.
Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to the command post. You know what it is. Post up, take command. I, of course, am your set man, Louie T. Thank you for joining me as we get into our final practice preseason game number 2 at the Chiefs. This was like a bit of a walkthrough again. A little bit more rigorous than a walkthrough, however. You know, there was still actual competition at practice, red zone period, things of that nature. Carson Wentz was rather sharp today in the red zone period, had 3 touchdown passes, one to Jahan Dotson, one to Terry McLaurin, one to De'Ami Brown during that period. And so it was more than just a walkthrough, but it wasn't a, tremendously tough and grueling, grinding type of practice. Obviously, you're 2 days out from your next preseason game, so you don't want to put too much on these players. That said, no J.D. McKissic at practice today. He was excused because of a groin. Now, the severity of the groin was not mentioned. Ron talked about not wanting to push him 2 days before a preseason game as if he'd be ready for that. So I don't really know what to make of that situation. Charles Leno Jr. was not at practice today. He had an excused absence. So, again, just so much going on with this team from an injury standpoint. And the beautiful thing about all of these injuries, I can't stress this enough, is that none of them have been serious to this point. Let's knock on a little bit of wood to ensure that it stays that way. But they're all nagging injuries, knick-knack injuries, so to speak. So we expect a lot of these guys to be back by week 1. The problem that you have with these knick-knack injuries, however, is that it's stopping them from getting the reps that we need them to get in order to be in a position where they're comfortable come week 1. That's the big issue that we're running into right now. And with all of the injuries, and I've talked about this before, so I don't want to really harp on this too much, it's affecting the way you can conduct practice and how you go about approaching these preseason games. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today, and it'll lead us right into what Ron talked about in his post-practice presser. So obviously, and I've alluded to this already, and I think I've even touched on it, briefly, but we're going to expound upon it today. Really, the biggest issue with, the injuries is it compromises the rest of the team. Meaning you can't have the practices that you want. The guys aren't getting the quality of work that they should be getting. And then it spills into the preseason game because you're not going to put these guys on the field in a preseason game if they're not healthy enough to practice. So the guys like John Bates and Cole Turner and Trey Turner and Andrew Norwell and guys like that who haven't been practicing, Wes Schweitzer, these guys aren't going to play on Saturday against the Chiefs. So now all of a sudden, I've talked about the different combinations that they've played with up front in practice this week. On Tuesday, it was Sadiq Charles at left guard and rookie, Chris Paul at right guard, right? I talked about them shuffling around the line on Wednesday, taking Sam Cosmi, kicking him inside to guard, and putting Cornelius Lucas at right tackle. So they're playing around with these different combinations out of necessity, obviously because of all the injuries. But what that does is it essentially puts you in a compromising spot come Saturday against the Chiefs. And you want to play up to a half. Like, this is the dress rehearsal game. A lot of these guys won't play now. It may be slightly different for Washington this year because of so many injuries and guys not getting reps, and maybe Ron wants to get these guys reps, before the end of preseason. It may be different. It may alter his thought process going into that final preseason game. But last year he played no one in that final preseason game. So I'm looking at this as the last time we more than likely will see the starters in the preseason. And Ron talked about this at the podium after practice. You ideally would like to see these guys for a half of football because you're ramping them up to be ready and prepared to play a full game. And so this is the last natural step that you take. And how can you feel comfortable putting Carson Wentz on the field for an entire half of football when we're talking about the offensive line playing musical chairs? We're talking about Sadiq Charles at left guard. We're talking about Cam or Chase Roulier being on a pitch count. So he might not even be out there for the duration of the first team offense being out there. So then you could be adding another backup piece in Keith Ishmael out there, at center. And then you could either have Sam Cosmi at guard, which I don't think they're going to do. I think it's ultimately going to be Chris Paul at guard, which is a rookie, and Sam Cosmi at right tackle. Or you could be talking about Sam Cosmi at right guard and then putting Cornelius Lucas at right tackle. Either way, it's an uncommon combination of guys you're putting on the field. It's not something that you would normally do. And so you can't feel all that comfortable with having to do that and having to put your starting quarterback behind that patchwork offensive line against an all-pro defender in Chris Jones. Like, that's not ideal. So Ron is kind of playing with the idea of how long do I keep my guys out there? How long do I put Carson and the rest of the offense at risk, knowing that we have a compromised offensive line? We have a compromised tight end group. I've talked about the tight end position. At practice this week on Wednesday, we had 2 tight ends. Eli Wolf, who just got here a week and a half ago, and an undrafted rookie, Armani, why do I always forget his last name? Rogers. Jesus. I mean, that's probably going to be the same 2 tight ends we take into the game on Saturday. Like, I mean, what are we supposed to do? How do you call a game when you've got 2 tight ends healthy? When you've got three or four offensive linemen down and one on a pitch count that's just coming back and playing in his first game in almost 8 to 9 months? Like, how do you even process that as a play caller? How do you, as a coach, even approach that game? Which is why I've kind of taken the approach to this game of whatever happens, happens. I'm not putting the expectations that I would have put on this game, like the sharpness, the crispness of the offense, what you want to see. I can't put that same expectation on this team with what we're going into the game with, right? We'll talk more about that on Friday. But transitioning to what Ron had to say after practice, and it wasn't long. Ron had a 3-minute or so presser, so it was very quick, in and out, which is what you would expect from a day like today, where the practice was rather light and they're really preparing to take off to go to Kansas City and play in this preseason game on Saturday. He talked about the ideal amount of reps you would like to see from your starters in this dress rehearsal game, which I just alluded to and used Ron's comments as a reference point. You'd like to see them play a half of football, but the likelihood is, again, it'll really be dependent upon how they perform. Because Ron and company aren't going to care that, you've got Sadiq Charles at left guard, Chase Roulier on a snap count, and Chris Paul, a rookie, at right guard. They're not going to care about that. They just want to see these guys go out there and execute, because there could be a point in the season where all these guys have to play and maybe even play together. So they're not gonna allow the excuse that I am going to allow to be baked in, that this is what it is. But that said, if they early in the game show that they can't handle being out there and there's constant pressure, he may have to yank Wentz and company out of there. Like, there's no reason to put your guys at risk because of what you're putting on the field. Like, that just doesn't make sense in a preseason game. So ideally, he would like to see this offense go out there, maybe score on one possession, put together a lengthy possession, maybe 2 really solid possessions, and get those guys out of there, to be honest. Clearly, you would like to start to build up that callus, right? You'd like to build up that stamina and endurance. You can't replicate playing in an NFL game unless you play in an NFL game. I keep repeating myself when I say that, but it's the truth. And so there's no preparing. You can run all the up tempo you want in practice. You can run all the no huddle and all the 2-minute drills you want, but it doesn't supplement and it doesn't replace actual game reps. Getting out there, being on the field for a 13-play drive, giving up a touchdown, and then coming off the field, sitting down, getting a cup of Gatorade, your offense goes 3 and out, now you're back out on the field. Like, you can't replicate that in practice. You can only have that happen in a game. And so it's tough. The defense won't be altered, right? They're fine. They got most of their guys. They're going to go out there. They're going to get a great test. I'll be more so fixated on the defensive side of the football because they're ready to rock and roll for the most part. There's no excuses for them. The offense is the one that's going to be compromised going into this preseason game. But he talked about the looks, the return looks in practice. So, there's the big conversation all week long has been, the return game. Antonio Gibson getting a ton of reps as a kickoff return man. Also, Jahan Dotson has been getting reps in the kickoff return and punt return realm. And so there's been a lot of discussion surrounding those two players in particular and what their roles may ultimately be. And Ron was like, look, we just want to get these guys prepared in the event that something happens and they got to go back there. And who knows what happens, right? But we don't want, and Nate Kazar, the special teams coordinator, spoke today, and he pretty much echoed this. Like, look, we don't know what's going to happen. And the first time they get reps can't be against Jacksonville, So we want these guys to be prepared no matter what happens, whether, we have some injuries or, the situation, arises where this guy's, skill set is necessary or warranted here, and we want to put that guy back there. Whatever the case may be, we just want them to be prepared, and we want to be prepared as a staff that these guys can get the job done. So that's kind of what, they've been doing with them. Obviously, okay, Antonio Gibson wasn't fielding kickoffs and wasn't on any punt coverage or kickoff coverage until he fumbled the football. So, again, they can dress it up whatever way they want. I think now we've gotten past that whole situation where, he's going to be on all these different teams. We're past that. I think we're at the point now with, is he actually going to return kickoffs or not? Because he's done this in the past in college, and he was very successful at it. Same thing with Jahan Dotson. Very successful at it in college as a punt return man. Will he field punts at any point this season in his rookie campaign? That's kind of where my brain is now. I'm past the whole, he fumbled, this is his punishment, yada, yada, yada. Okay, I'm past that now. Is he actually going to return? Because the whole punt protection thing and, being on all these different, I've kind of, played that out in my mind. Like, okay, they sent the message. He got it loud and clear. Now, the real question becomes, is he really going to return kickoffs, or is someone else going to do that? And he's just there in case of an emergency. Is Jahan Dotson really going to return punts, or is that really just in case of an emergency? I've already advocated for, you get in a big spot late in the ball game, you need one. Why not send a young fella back there and see what he can do, right? Like, that's the kind of time that I'm on. I'm not saying you send Jahan back there for every single punt. That's ludicrous. But you get to week 1 against Jacksonville, it's 2017, we're up by 3, or we're down 3, or it's tied at 17 with 3 minutes and 45 seconds left. Jacksonville's punting from their own 11-yard line. You're going to get great field position. Why not send Jahan Dotson back there? He's standing right at the 45-yard line. Ball's punted, and he's fielding it at midfield, and all of a sudden, it's showtime. He might be able to break a tackle or just hit it quick and get up the field, and next thing you know, 55 yards later, he's in the end zone. That's what I'm saying. He doesn't need to be back there all the time, but, and that's what Ron is kind of advocating. Like, hey, we don't know what's going to happen, but we just want those guys to be prepared no matter what. Talked about J.D. McKissick being out of practice with a groin. He said it was a little sore. It was a little tight. I always get nervous when people start talking about groins because so many things funnel through your groin. We saw that with Curtis Samuel last year. It started with his groin, then it ended up being his back, then it ended up being his hamstring. And so much funnels through your groin. I've had a groin injury. It's not fun, and it really doesn't heal. Now, if it's just tightness, that can pass with time, with the proper rest and treatment, that can pass. But when you actually strain it, when you actually pull a muscle, there's no treatment, there's no rest that's going to, get it done in a short period of time. That's going to take a lot of time for that to actually heal. So hopefully it's just minor. It sounds like it's just minor, and it's really more of a precautionary thing than anything else. But we'll see. If he plays in the game, then it was precautionary. If he doesn't play in the game, maybe it's a little bit more serious, or maybe they just said, why are we risking JD? We don't need to in the second preseason game, which I wouldn't have a problem with either. And then finally, Ron talked about the response this week by Antonio Gibson to, being on special teams, being on the punt protection team, being back there fielding kickoffs, being, on the first, second, and third team offense and taking reps with all of those units. He said he handled it well. He handled it like a professional, handled it the way they thought he would handle it. And then Ron then went and said, hey, look, I told you guys before that we've got 3 different backs that offer 3 different set of skills that we feel really good about. And so you want to get these guys in as many different situations as possible because we feel like every single one of these guys can help us on the football field in different capacities. So, honestly, Ron's been, doing a lot of, I'll call it, he's been doing a lot of diplomatic speaking this week. A lot of what we would expect from a politician, talking around the actual, point and, making excuses for something that we know. Look, he fumbled. He's got a fumbling issue. It's a problem. You can't have it. You've talked about not being able to tolerate this. Your offensive coordinator has talked about not wasting possessions and how important it is to hold on to the football. Antonio Gibson knows this. He talked after the game very briefly with the media about, I can't put the ball on the ground. I can't put my team and myself in that type of position. I've got to be better. Everyone knows what this is about. You don't have to talk about, him being multifaceted or him being versatile. We weren't having these discussions 2 weeks ago. Okay. The man fumbled and now we're talking about him being on special teams. So it is what it is. Just all Ron had to say was, look, we can't have the fumbles, but this guy is so talented that if he's not in the game offensively, we want to utilize him in some other capacity because he's too talented not to be utilized. And if you're the third back, and I think Ron did say this to his credit, I think he did say the third back on the roster has to play special teams. And J.D. McKissic is fixed as the second back. He's not moving, and that's his role. So you either go from 1 to 3 or 3 to 1. So Brian Robinson, he's currently the third back, and I think he's going to remain there. Okay, that's been my stance, and I'm sticking to it. Unless, Antonio Gibson fumbles again, then that's a moot point, and it's dead. He's now your third back. But, Brian Robinson goes from your third back to your first back. Or he's remaining at the third back, and Antonio Gibson remains at the number 1 back. But J.D. McKissic is entrenched as your number 2 back. It's similar to Taylor Heineke. Either Sam Howell is your third quarterback or he's your first. He's not going to jump in front of and leapfrog Taylor Heineke at any point this season. He's either 3 or he's 1, right? That's the same way with the running back position. Either you're 1 or you're 3, but you're not going to be 2 because that's J.D. McKissic's role. Again, unless J.D.'s not healthy, then you might slide up if he's not to 2. But if we've got a healthy J.D. McKissic, he's entrenched as the number 2 running back. So the third running back has to play special teams. That's not an option. That is mandatory. Right now, that's Brian Robinson. But if it becomes Antonio Gibson, then he has to play special teams. That's all Ron had to say. Like, you don't have to keep giving us excuses and making up different ways of why you're doing what you're doing. The man fumbled. He had an issue last year. We talked to him. We said he has to address this. He fumbled in the first preseason game. That's a problem for us. So we're going to take a look at, Brian Robinson and give him an extended look and see what he's talking about as the lead dog. And we still believe in Antonio, and we're going to give him opportunities to prove he still belongs in that role. But, we can't wait on him to fix this fumbling thing. We got to move on if he can't take care of the football. And if he's going to continue to contribute, whether it's in a starting role or not, we're going to need him to contribute on special teams. But maybe that's a little too forward. That's a little too blunt. You're trying to protect the player in this particular instance. I get it. But sometimes I get annoyed because I'm like, Ron, you just went around the world in 180 days just to make a point that you could have literally said in probably 2 sentences. And you probably can say the same thing about me. I could probably give you an answer for something that's asked of me in 2 to 3 sentences, and I give you a whole soliloquy and then come back at the end and give you a synopsis of what I honestly thought was the answer to, what I just said. You're like, okay, dude, you could have said that 5 minutes ago. So I guess that's the pot calling the kettle black. Anyway, today was a short, abbreviated day. Again, not much really to sink our teeth into. We knew that. I kind of told you guys that that's what it would be. So tomorrow, we will definitely chop it up. We will be live tomorrow talking about the upcoming preseason game. It's a mystery, man. I mean, honestly, I'm going to enjoy the build up to it because there's so many unknowns. There are so many variables that we really don't have the answers to going into this preseason game. It's actually pretty exciting, at the same time nerve-wracking, because I'd rather know that my starting offensive line is intact and ready to go. I would rather have a full complement of tight ends going into the game so that there aren't any issues, no questions as to what we can run. Again, it's a preseason game. You're not showing that much. It's going to be vanilla, but even the simple runs become complex. I told you on the touchdown run last week, Brian Robinson ran to his left and got into the end zone. Had he had to wait, that backside defender would have tackled him for a loss because Amani Rodgers on the backside didn't block him at all. He tried. He just is terrible at blocking, right? So, you're telling me he's the number one tight end that we have right now. I can't see any instance in which we will be able to run the football effectively in this game against Kansas City. But we'll talk about that more on tomorrow's show. Anyway, I am a Washington fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Washington spirit will never die. Washington spirit will never fold. Until we meet again, post up and take command. You guys, take care of yourselves. Have a great rest of the day, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace.
LouieTeeNetwork.